It was one of the strangest and most terrifying experiences of my life. My crippling fear of flying meant that my trips home from the University of Vermont were always grueling road trips, a solid 7-state journey that often felt endless. I'd typically drive for 10 hours straight down I-81, which would land me somewhere deep in rural Virginia, exhausted and ready to crash. My routine was to find the least sketchy-looking motel I could, preferably one near a 24-hour diner, get a room for the night, and then get back on the road at dawn. At the end of my sophomore year, I pulled into a familiar spot, the Ridgeview Motor Lodge, a place I'd stayed at twice before. I paid the clerk in cash for my room, grabbed a late dinner of hash browns and eggs from the nearby Waffle House, and headed back. I showered, watched some late-night talk show, and made it to about 11:30 p.m. before the craving hit me like a physical blow. During that second year of college, one of my roommates had gotten me hooked on smoking, a disgusting habit I was desperately trying to kick before I got home. My parents would have absolutely lost their minds. My rule for the trip was simple: no cigarettes, no exceptions, to ensure I wouldn't be tempted all summer. But it turns out my willpower was weak, and the nicotine withdrawal was turning into a sweaty, sleepless nightmare. I knew I wouldn't get any rest, so I broke my own rule, dug into a side pocket of my duffel bag, and pulled out a crumpled pack of Camels. I grabbed my lighter and stepped out onto the second-floor walkway for a late-night smoke, thinking to myself how much I was going to regret this. The motel was built in that classic U-shape, overlooking a central parking lot. As I leaned against the iron railing, I saw an older, beat-up Ford Taurus pull into a spot below. A man who looked to be in his 60s got out and started fumbling in his pocket for his room key. Just as he reached his door on the ground floor, I caught a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. A young man and woman seemed to materialize from the shadows, rushing up to him. There was a brief, tense interaction I couldn't hear, and then the three of them disappeared into the room. Something about the entire interaction felt deeply wrong. They didn't move like family. It was more like they were cornering him. The way he flinched when he first saw them, the way they seemed to gently push him inside before slipping in and closing the door, it was suspicious. I finished the last drag of my cigarette, stubbed it out on the concrete, and went back inside to flush the butt down the toilet. I grabbed my phone and went back out onto the walkway. My first instinct wasn't to call 911. I wasn't 100% sure what I'd seen, and I'd feel like a complete fool if the cops busted down the door on a family argument. Still, I was ready to dial 911 if anything else happened. I stood there, watching the door across the lot, debating what to do. The moment I turned to go back to my room and try to sleep, I heard two loud, muffled pops echo from that exact room. I grew up around hunting rifles. I knew the sound of gunfire instantly. My body reacted before my mind did, and I scrambled behind one of the thick concrete pillars that supported the walkway. Just as I ducked, the motel room door burst open. The young man ran out first, limping heavily but moving fast across the parking lot. The woman stumbled out right after him, falling hard onto the asphalt before picking herself up and trying to run. Then the older man walked out calmly, raised a pistol, and shot her in the back. I squeezed myself against the cold concrete, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unlock my phone. Before I could press call, I heard the woman's voice cry out, "Please don't kill me. I'm pregnant."
Subscribe.
She tried to say something else, but it was cut off by the second sound, the final, deafening shot. It was the coldest thing I've ever witnessed. He heard her plea and didn't even pause. It wasn't that he didn't believe her. It's like he did believe her and simply didn't care. Still shaking, I finally managed to dial 911, then bolted back into my room, slammed the door, and slid under the bed just as the dispatcher's voice came on the line. Time slowed to a crawl. I stayed on the line while waiting for the sirens, terrified a shootout would erupt. But when the police arrived, the man gave himself up peacefully. I watched from my window as they walked him to a patrol car, silent and cooperative. Then I made the mistake of looking at the woman's body. He'd shot her right in the face. It didn't look real, more like a cheap Halloween prop, a trick of the mind trying to protect itself. It stayed that way, unreal, until the EMTs arrived and covered her with a sterile white sheet. They don't do that for movie props when the cameras aren't rolling. It's been almost 15 years, and while I believe in a person's right to defend themselves, chasing a fleeing woman into a parking lot is not self-defense. And executing her after she begged for her life and her child's is a level of cold-blooded evil I pray I never witness again. Sometimes, late at night, I still feel that phantom craving, and I can never be sure if it's for the nicotine or for that last drag I took from that crumpled pack of Camels just before I watched a man become a monster.
You survived the monster with a gun, but can you survive the one with a smile?
He never laid a hand on me, but the look in his eyes when he smiled at me from across the buffet the next night told me everything he had planned to do. My mother, who immigrated from Guanajuato as a girl, was adamant that we maintain a connection to our heritage, so for the past few summers we'd been spending a week exploring different parts of Mexico. This time it was Ixtapa, staying at a resort called the Mirador Bay Club, a place a family friend had recommended. My mom loved it so much she bought a timeshare. The resort was massive, built directly into the side of a steep coastal hill with the restaurants at the bottom and the rooms scattered up winding roads. To get to the upper levels, you had two choices: a slow, meandering shuttle van or a direct-line gondola that scaled the cliff. My mother had a strict policy based on a deep-seated fear of heights. We were to stick to the shuttle no matter what. It was a rule she reminded us of every morning. Midway through the week after breakfast, my younger brother and sister were desperate to hit the pool. I had to finish an online assignment for a summer course, so I headed to the resort's business center near the lobby. We agreed to meet back at the room in an hour. After wrestling with the spotty Wi-Fi on one of their old HP Pavilion desktops, I was done. The thought of waiting for the shuttle in the oppressive, humid air felt unbearable, so I decided to break the rule and take the gondola. I was the only one in the queue, and I stepped into the small cabin quickly.
Subscribe.
Just as the young attendant was about to slide the door shut, a man appeared, and the attendant paused to let him board. He was middle-aged and wiry, with thinning hair and a cheap-looking pair of sunglasses pushed on top of his head. He wore a damp, short-sleeved dress shirt and dark trousers. As a rule, my mom also insisted we speak Spanish whenever possible, cautioning that loud English could mark us as affluent American tourists and therefore targets. So when the man gestured vaguely out the window and muttered, "Que vista," in Spanish, I just nodded and replied, "Sí," before turning to watch the ocean scenery. The gondola had 2 stops, and ours was the first. When the doors slid open and the attendant asked if anyone was getting off, the man remained perfectly still, not even glancing up. I said, "Yo," and stepped out onto the concrete platform. Our room was up a short, steep road and then another flight of stairs. I was halfway up the incline, feeling a little uneasy from the weirdly silent ride, when I heard the distinct sound of leather shoes on asphalt behind me. I glanced over my shoulder and saw him, the man from the gondola, walking briskly in my direction. A jolt of pure ice shot through my veins. I turned and started running up the road and scrambled up the first set of stairs. For a brief moment, I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just a coincidence, until I heard his footsteps quicken to match my pace. It was a chase. He was definitely chasing me. I could hear his breathing now, ragged but steady, as I pushed myself faster, my lungs burning. I didn't stop until I reached the heavy wooden door of our suite. I tore my backpack off, plunging my hand in, blindly searching for my key card. His footsteps were closing in, getting louder and louder, until they were all I could hear over the blood pounding in my ears. Finally, my fingers closed around the thin plastic. I fumbled with it, shoved it into the slot, and the indicator light flashed a damning red. A sob caught in my throat. I didn't have time for this. I flipped the key card over and jammed it in again, and this time the lock clicked open. I threw myself inside, slammed the door shut, and threw the deadbolt. The instant it slid home, the footsteps outside slowed to a stop. It was dead silent.
Subscribe.
For a moment it was dead silent, and then he spoke, his voice low and right by the door. Que vista. My blood ran cold. I checked the locks again and backed away to the living area where my siblings were watching cartoons, oblivious. When my mom walked in from the patio a few minutes later, she saw the terror on my face and knew something was wrong. I told her everything. She hugged me, relieved I was safe, but seemed to dismiss the encounter as just a very strange man. I almost managed to forget about it until the following evening at dinner. We were halfway through our meal at the main buffet when a strange feeling made me turn and scan the crowded room. And then I saw him. He was sitting by himself at a small table not 10 feet away, staring right at me. The moment our eyes connected, a slow, horrifying grin spread across his face, a grin full of teeth that he wanted me to see. I whispered to my mom, "That's him." She looked over, saw he was alone, and saw the way he was glaring at me. We left our food and I walked so fast past his table, I nearly ran, not taking my eyes off him until we were safely out of the restaurant. I never saw him again, but I was lucky my family was already in the room that day. He thought I was alone, and something about that grin tells me he would have found a way through that door. I still get a pang of anxiety every time a hotel keycard flashes red on the first try.
You escaped the man who watched you run. But what if next time he's already inside when you wake up?
I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this, and it still haunts me. After graduating from college in the summer of 1989, my parents rewarded me with my first car, a well-loved '87 Mercury Cougar, which felt like the keys to the entire world. But after a few weeks of just driving around my small Ohio town, I felt a familiar restlessness.
Subscribe.
The inspiration came from my grandpa, who told me about the cross-country road trip he and my grandma took after they got married. A switch flipped in my head. That's what I needed to do. I spent a week poring over a Rand McNally road atlas, and with my parents' surprising blessing and a suitcase full of clothes, I set out. My plan was to drive west, starting a loop in Oregon, heading south through California, then cutting east across the desert toward the Rockies, and eventually back home. The first half of the trip was magical. I saw landscapes I'd only ever seen in magazines and met some wonderful people, including a family at a town fair in Utah. They invited me to their home for dinner and gifted me a small hand-carved wooden quail as a souvenir of my journey. It was a testament to the simple kindness of strangers. I'm fast-forwarding to the return leg of the trip. Somewhere deep in rural Nevada on US Route 50. It was late, past midnight, and a fierce thunderstorm was hammering my windshield, making the road slick and visibility near zero. I was exhausted, my back screaming from hours in the driver's seat. I almost pulled over at a rest stop, but the darkness felt too absolute. Then a flickering neon sign appeared through the rain. The Sagebrush Inn, a desolate little motel attached to a single-pump gas station. It wasn't much, but it was a light in the storm. I got gas, checked into a room on the second floor, and was handed a physical key. The room was tiny and smelled of stale cigarette smoke, but all I wanted was sleep. I took a long, hot shower, letting the water work out the knots in my shoulders. After, I used the room's rotary phone to call my parents and let them know where I was, then climbed into bed. I have a firm rule for myself when I'm in an unfamiliar place. Always leave the bathroom light on, just so I don't trip over something in the pitch black. I fell asleep to the soft hiss of static from the small Zenith television. The next thing I knew, it was 2 in the morning, and I was awake. The door to my room was opening. A man in a dark hoodie, a black ski mask, and holding a small dark revolver stepped inside. A wave of cold so intense it felt like my blood had turned to ice washed over me. I lay perfectly still, my eyes barely open, praying my breathing was even. He clearly thought I was asleep. He moved silently over to the cheap particle board dresser, picked up my wallet and slipped it into his pocket. My mind was racing, trying to find a way out, but there was none. Then he turned and walked toward the faint glow coming from the bathroom. The moment his back was to me and he crossed that threshold, I moved. I slid out of the bed without a sound, my bare feet hitting the cold, grimy carpet. I didn't grab anything. I just ran. I wrenched the door open, flew down the exterior metal staircase, and sprinted across the rain-soaked asphalt toward the gas station's light. By some miracle, a state trooper's cruiser was parked there, the officer inside sipping a coffee. I must have looked like a ghost appearing out of the storm in my pajamas, my hair a mess. I banged on his window, and he jumped so violently he spilled his coffee all over his dashboard. After I gasped out what was happening, he was on his radio instantly, calling for backup. The intruder surrendered without a fight. They found him still in the bathroom, likely startled by my sudden escape. I didn't get any more sleep that night. The rest of the drive home was a blur of paranoia. I still have that little wooden quail from the family in Utah, a reminder of the kindness in the world. But now it sits on my highest shelf, a second reminder that no matter how kind people can be, some doors just don't lock securely enough.